Hello and welcome to the Authentic Uprising Show. I'm your host, Jill Simons. I am so excited to grow in the radical art of standing in what God says about you with you today. This show is a place where we pour into our concept of who we are, how we've been created with intention by God, and how we can live out of the freedom that He has for us more every single day. Hello, and welcome to today's episode of the Authentic Uprising podcast. As always, I'm your host, Jill Simons, and you know that I just love spending every Tuesday with you. I'm so excited to share my guest with you today. I have known her since she was a college student through the beauty of the connection of the internet. And I've always been so inspired by watching her career as she really steps into what the Lord is calling her to do specifically, which is coach and mentor women to really stand in their dignity, which is something that we need so much in our world right now. So Lizzy Rich is a coach and a faith-based blogger who helps people really embrace God's design for their dignity and their identity. And today we're going to be chatting about why our self-worth really can and should be detached from external metrics. So Lizzy, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Hi, yeah, I'm so excited to be here.
So why don't you start by telling us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about why you got into this space in the first place?
Yeah, totally. Definitely like a long story made short, but I have just been like on a very long journey with the Lord of very radical healing and relationship. And within that kind of journey, the Lord in a very funny way, like offhanded through like college classes, had me make this Instagram where I just started writing to women about first just fashion and modest fashion, because it was an area that I struggled with so much. And I hated the idea of modesty. I really rejected it for a very long time. And learning what it is to dignify my body, learning what like the worth of just my body is, was so transformative for me. And so I really wanted to transform that narrative around what modesty is and what clothing is and what it looks like to dress in a beautiful and modest way. But as like I walked with the blog, and as it grew, and as I like started talking to more women, and it just kind of transformed from there into this space of just vulnerably walking with women and sharing women what it looks like to be in a day-to-day relationship with the Lord, right? To walk towards sanctity one day at a time. And self-worth healing has been some of the biggest parts of that. And that naturally led, as I just fell in love with walking with women, it led into me becoming a women's coach with a program called the Women's School. And so now it's just like my great joy that I get to walk one-on-one with women in discovering what their self-worth is, what their identity is, what their purpose is, and what it's like to like live so confidently in what they were created to be and who they were created by. Right. So
I love that. And I think that that's someplace, modesty, especially, it's interesting that that was kind of your gateway into all of this, because I think that's an area so often that does get presented really toxically. And then everybody kind of throws the baby out with the bathwater when, you know, either they go all the way into like, I'm going to really just clamp down and embrace every part of this, which really comes from a shame-based mentality, or I'm just going to chuck the whole thing and forget about this modesty thing. And like so many things, it's such a middle road that you have to kind of find and parse. And I've always appreciated that in your posts, where it's really about like, we can't have, you know, here's your 10 rules kind of thing. It really is about discerning those individual choices that you make.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's about like, I think a huge thing with modesty is knowing what you're worth and knowing what your body is worth and being able to dress in a way that reflects that. Right. And so it's actually a freedom, and it's actually an expression of self-worth versus a shame or versus like rules, right? Yeah, it has been definitely a really beautiful journey to like get to that point, because I was in the rules and in the shame. I went to both extremes before I found my medium. So, and honestly, every form of growth, I've been to both extremes. So
I think probably a lot of people resonate with that, especially people that are Christians, because that's where so much of what we try and create sits, is where people, we're not necessarily the thing that people who have never met the Lord are encountering. But we're really working with these people that we've met Christ. We have the start of this relationship with him. There's so many things that it's just like, gosh, this really wasn't supposed to be this way, where there's just a lack of that fruit, especially of peace, that so many people are hungry for, that we find even when we're in relationship with Christ. And it's so many of these topics like modesty, like self-worth, that are kind of the smaller pieces of the puzzle that are still so necessary to get right internally, just in and of ourselves, to be able to even enter into a relationship where we're really being authentic with Christ.
Yeah. I got nothing to add. That was amazing.
So in walking with women through these struggles with shame from modesty, self-worth obviously became a part of the conversation early on. And so how did you, in early days, after having been at these extremes, really come across this conviction about your own self-worth and where self-worth really lies?
That's a good question. I think what's so I would say it actually started with scripture, if that makes sense. As I grew in my relationship with the Lord and in wanting to like grow, and I'm a person who just like is obsessed with knowing things. Like when I know things, I feel like I'm more confident. We work through that in different ways, but when I started this blog and I knew all of a sudden women were listening, and I was like, whoa, I don't know if I'm equipped to be speaking, and for women to be listening to what I'm speaking. And so I just, went on this like really intense thing. And so I started reading different like church teachings on different things, or like different Christian teachings on worth and modesty. But then I dove into the gospel and really looked at the way that Jesus spoke to people, and the way that he spoke to women specifically, and the way that he loved on women in the Old and the New Testament, right? And I had a lot of wounds surrounding my self-worth, really first and foremost rooted in I had an addiction to pornography that really like clinically, like it's psychologically proven to have drastically negative impacts on a woman's self-worth, to just constantly dealing with different rejections and sisterly wounds and friend wounds and all of these different things that really drastically can tamper a woman's self-worth, right? And so I think in beginning that healing journey, it's discovering the way that like Jesus speaks to me in those moments, the way that Jesus would speak to his sister, the way that Jesus would speak to a friend, the way that Jesus would speak to a daughter, right? And then imagining myself in those situations and reading it in the gospel and like actually knowing what he would say, right? I don't even have to imagine it. He says it. And like sitting in that reality was probably the start, right? To like really living in what my self-worth was who does Jesus say that I am, and how does he speak to me? And then like therapy and other like unbound ministries, like going through these different things that really heal wounds and replace those things with truth and reality. So it's been like it's been a very long journey. It hasn't been an overnight transition, that's for sure.
Yeah, that's so beautiful though, because I mean, you talk about places to go to renew your self-worth. Like feet of Jesus is, like there's no competition there. Like, that's where
it's a good one.
Exactly. Like that is, and I love that is so much in like how his voice is and revealed, because you're right, we have those concrete examples of scripture, but then we also have the confidence that God wants to speak to us in that internal relationship that we have with him. And that's something that one of my dear friends and mentors, Beth Davis, when early in this journey for me, was talking about, I was talking with her about really discerning, is this the Lord's voice. And I will never forget that she said, it's always going to be kinder than you think it will be. And that is part of the discernment. And I was just like, gosh, man, what? And I became so aware then of the lies around what I thought his voice would sound like, that the things that I had placed there because of my own wounds as well, that I was like, well, I'm sure he would say, and never having asked him, never having allowed him to speak about it to me, submitting my free will in that way. But then when I did make that shift into starting that kind of relationship with him, how often that is so the case, where there's just this beautiful, I'm always aware of the sister component with the person of Jesus. I think when I speak to the Father, I'm aware of the daughter thing, but it really is funny because I feel like Jesus and I now are at this point where he's such my older brother. Like, he will give me this face sometimes where I'm like, what are you like goading me? Like, just like, so are you going to do it? Are you going to respond? And I'm just like, okay, give me a minute, Jesus. Like, I have all brothers. And so that's a relationship that I'm intimately familiar with, but it's just funny because that really is the level of intimacy he desires with us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was reading this book on prayer, and one of the first things in the introduction was we often put our wounds from past relationships onto our relationship with Jesus, right? And so if we have a fatherly wound, a brotherly wound, a sisterly wound, a friend wound, all these different like potential things that are very real and are very real wounds that sit in our heart, right? And affect us. And because that's the only thing we know, that's our reference point. That becomes our reference point for our relationship with the Lord. And so a lot of times, like, that work needs to be done before you can even dive into like I love that. Beth Davis, amazing. That doesn't shock me that she would say something that beautiful, but it is shocking. Like, every time I enter into that space of prayer where I let the Lord speak over me in like a very like spirit-led way, it's always shocking how kind he is. Like, I'm always shocked, and I shouldn't be, but I am, because there's those wounds there where I expect judgment or even sarcasm sometimes, like expect there to be a sarcastic remark, and it's like so kind and merciful and forgiving. And I'm like, oh, yeah.
Absolutely. And also, and I think that that's what Jesus is really teaching me in this brotherly relationship, like also fun, like not sarcastic, but like actually fun, where it's like this very childlike, joy-filled exchange where he's really inviting me to go back to this time in my life, not to the wounds of childhood, but to the joy of childhood, and really the things that were skipped or missed or decreased in childhood for whatever reason, and renewing that and really resurrecting that part of my story even now, which has just been so interesting.
No, so that's so funny that you bring that up, because that is exactly where I feel like the Lord is leading me right now, is this place of play with him. And I think it was Thomas Aquinas, maybe, who says, what someone says, the soul at like play is the soul at rest. And oftentimes we can have such a serious relationship with the Lord of like, I have to fix all these things and work on all these things with the Lord. And it's so interesting, because I was like, I have a great relationship with the Lord. I talk to him every single day. So why don't I trust him? Why can't I fall on him and the ways that I want to? And it's actually my therapist who was like, intimacy is built through play. It's built through like that fun interaction. It's built through that trust and that bond of friendship, right? And realizing that's something that's so essential. Like, I need to trust him to trust what he's saying to me. Like, if I don't trust him, and if I don't trust who he is, and if I don't have like fun with him, then how can I trust when he speaks identity over me, right? And when he speaks truth over me? It's like, I can't live in that, right? So I just love that. I think play is such an essential aspect that's like never brought up in prayer.
Yeah, that's been because I don't even know if I've come across it like formally anywhere. It's really just been like, oh, this seems like what we're doing now. And
yes,
I'm here for it.
And that's yeah, I feel like that's actually something I also learned from Beth Davis, is like watching her. I'm like, she has such a playful relationship with the Lord, to like joke with him and to laugh with him and like bring funny things to him, not just serious things. Like that's kind of what I've been seeing and watching this intimacy unfold. And how kind of bringing it back to this idea of worth and dignity, like as I watch this like relationship of intimacy and fun and play unfold, so many of my wounds around my identity that have to do with intimacy, around being wanted, around being seen, all of those like things begin to heal. Because it's like, oh, I'm so like, I am funny, like wounds around like, oh, I'm not a funny person. And so I get insecure when I'm with people because whatever. And it's like, actually, like the Lord laughs at my jokes all the time. And that seems so like silly and a little bit weird, but I'm like, no, I'm funny. Like Jesus and I laugh all the time. Or like, oh no, like Jesus wants to be around me. He wants to like, like when I feel like, oh, I never had anyone, like I was never someone's person, right? Wait, I'm Jesus's person. He wants me here. I'm his friend, I'm his sibling, I'm his, and like, it's just so like radically healing to develop that relationship with the Lord and watch that wound, like see where he was in all of those moments and how moving forward, it's this place of stability, right? That I could fall on.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Absolutely. It's funny because in hearing you talk about this relationship with the Lord where he wants to be with you, it reminds me of this story that one of my mentors in prophetic ministry has shared with me, where he was praying with someone and asked the Lord to share a word with him for the person. And the Lord said, tell them that I like them. And this man was kind of like, do you want me to say love? Like, that you love them? And the Lord was like, no, just say that you like them. And so he delivers this word, but he's kind of like, sorry, I think this is wrong. This doesn't seem very helpful. And the person was so touched because that was the lie that they were believing, is that like, there was like this obligation almost in the relationship with God. Well, God's got to love everybody. So like, I guess I'm included in that sort of thing, as opposed to this idea that like, no, the Lord actually likes you. Like he wants to be around you. And this is something that is life-giving to him. And I think that is something that doesn't get talked about enough, and something that a lot of people are maybe just straight up unaware of.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
I think that all of these pieces of the puzzle in relationship with God lead us back to the necessity of detaching our self-worth from these human achievement pieces that we place our worth on and in. So, you and I talked before we got on the call about how it's swimsuit season and how there's, just all of these societal markers for what point you're supposed to be at what age, and all of these other pressures that people have in life that really create this lie that as soon as I'm married, I will feel confident. As soon as I'm X weight, as soon as I get X job, as soon as I make X amount of money, and not having achieved those things, so often that lie kind of goes unchallenged because it's like, well, I don't know because I've never gotten there. So seems like that could happen. And I know that was very prevalent in my young adulthood. And so you, especially being young, significantly younger than I am in your young adult life right now, with so many unrealized potentials in your life right now. How are you navigating kind of this lie that I see so prevalently, especially in people who have so many things that they know they haven't done yet, and so then therefore are putting self-worth on those things out in the future?
Yeah, that's so funny because everything you brought up is just things that I've so very much so had to work through. Like growing up in Southern California, it's always bathing suit season here, and girls can wear like, yeah. And I always was, for some reason, women in California are all size like 0 and size 2. Not that's a very extreme exaggeration, but that's how my brain processed it as a kid, right? I'm the biggest. And like when I'm just this size, like boys will finally like me. I'll finally be confident in a bathing suit. Like all of these different things, I'll finally get what I want, right? But it was like, what do I even want? I guess I want to be seen, right? Like, I just want to be seen and I want to be wanted, right? And so that was like such a thing of like, once I lose the weight, then I'll be seen and wanted. And so it's just this like constant, like on a diet, having weird relationships with food, shaming myself for loving food, right? Like all of these things, being afraid to wear different bathing suits when other girls were wearing these like tiny little things, but I didn't feel confident to wear those tiny little things. And like all of these different things, right? And I feel like I'm just getting to this point of loving and honoring my body where it is, and seeing it as something that's so good. And the only thing that changed, my body has not changed. My situation has not changed. I'm still like a single woman who is not, there's no, like whatever. But the only thing that's changed is the way that I'm speaking to myself. And I think the way that we speak to ourselves is really important. And I don't think we realize like the gravity of our words, even because and it's like, well, if as long as I'm nice to other people, it doesn't matter what's happening inside my head. That's like this, for some reason, that's like this thing. And so we can be so self-deprecating and then say it's just thoughts, right? But I actually started, this was like a year ago, every time I walked by a mirror, I would say something that I loved about myself. Mm-hmm. And it seems so prideful and fake at the beginning. It did. It was like, this is not real. I am lying. I think my biggest thing would be my legs, right? And so I would compliment my legs. If I wore something, I would have to compliment my legs. Or if I did something, like when I saw myself in my mirror, and I would immediately catch myself being like, but if I could just make those a little bit smaller, I'd be so much happier. And so I started to change that narrative around how I spoke to myself, and how I spoke to myself when I ate, how I spoke to myself when I knew I was going to be in a bathing suit, how I spoke to how I like prepared my mind when people would make comments about my body, like even aunts making comments of like, oh my gosh, have you lost weight? You look great, right? I'm just taking care of myself right now, loving on my body, right? Like just like all of these different things, and watching my confidence transform. And I think it's rooted in my body is a temple. My body is a gift from the Lord, and I want to honor it. And so how do I honor it? I honor it by loving her, right? Like, and so like, that's how I was able to do it in a way that's not prideful. It's not vain, right? It's the Lord gave me my body. It's a gift, and I want to honor it. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. And so that's how I found it in bodily insecurity. Right. But I think with other things, right, of like, I'll be happy when I like, honestly, to this day, fight the lie that when I'm married, I'll be happy. Mm-hmm. And I know it's a lie, and it's something that I've achieved massive progress in. And I think it stems from, it's a very real desire of my heart to be married. And that's not, and I think it took me a really long time to realize it's not bad that this is my number, like this is the major desire of my heart. In fact, it's like very natural and it's very good, right? Like this is what like the Lord gave me this desire. And so it's like, okay, that it's there. But it's, what does it look like for me to dream in the season that the Lord has me in, if that makes sense? And that is how, like, realizing, I think it took a lot of stepping back, looking at other people's relationships, looking at other people's marriages, looking at other people's whatever, right? I was like, because I went through the season of like, I'm going to learn all that I can. So I'm going to look at all these people's marriages. I'm going to look at all these people's relationships so that I can be an expert when I like enter in, right? Which I think is a great, good thing, right? I was like, I'm going to skill up in all these different things. But as I started to do that, I started to see like, wow, there are women who are so lonely in marriage. They're so lonely. And I think for me, I realized that lie of I'll be happy when I'm married was actually rooted in something deeper, which is I'm alone and marriage is the solution to that loneliness. Right. And so it was actually rooted in a fear. And it like, and marriage was the solution to that fear. And that's not fair to my future spouse at all. He cannot satisfy that in any way, shape, or form. And I think for so many things, like for work, right? When I reach this job, then I'll be happy. And it could be this, like, there's maybe this lie, right? Surrounding like happiness of like, yeah, when I get this thing, I'll be happy because we're not living in the present moment, for sure. But I always wonder, like, what's the deeper root? What's happening that's telling you that happiness is not possible right now? Right? Yeah. Because for me, happiness wasn't possible because I'm alone. And there's no solution to the loneliness unless I'm married. Does that make sense? Like, I don't know. Absolutely. It was really like, that was a radical breakthrough point for me, to say like, okay, what does it look like for me to heal this wound of being alone now, and to work on that now. And by doing that, like I have seen just radical contentment in where I'm at. And it still will come, like it'll still come. Like I'll see people in relationships and I'm like, oh, Jesus, I really want that. It's there. I want that very badly. I want me some babies, like whatever. But it's, I also like love my life right now. Like I love it. I love the community. Like I'm so intentional about forming community in where I'm at. I'm so intentional about forming myself in like daily relationship with the Lord, not just in prayer, but like continuous, right? Like talking to him. Like I go to lunch alone. I'm like having a conversation with the Lord in my head. Right. Like, which is so like, I would have never done that before, but now I'm like sitting at lunch, like, like, and so it's, it's like definitely a process. And there's like way more healing than you think attached to the lie of when I achieve blank, I'll be happy.
That's super insightful, because it wasn't the marriage thing for me when I was your age. It was actually really interesting because I had the opposite of so many people's experiences, where I met my spouse when I was young and I was like, wait, Lord, like I was supposed to get this time for achievement before the marriage thing. And very much, I think, the way a lot of our secular culture looks at it. And I was very like discontented during that process, because I was like, but my PhD, but like all these achievement-based things that I really was putting that self-worth on. And now that I've gone through, like you talk about, so much of this healing work, I realize how much there is so many wounds around this idea of achievement and achieving worth and things like that, and feeling like I was going to miss the window where that was going to be possible, which was really going to impact my ability, I thought, to really ever reach that self-worth threshold. And now here I am, pregnant with my fourth child at an age that I was thinking I would maybe be getting started. And it's just so different than how I imagined it. And I think that is the one common thread I think I see amongst everyone, is that everybody's like, this was not how I planned it, whether it's, waiting or coming too early or whatever the situation is. I think that is really a hallmark of when we are open to God moving. People whose lives have gone exactly how they planned, so often I see that there's kind of not the door cracked open. And so I don't hear about that a lot in Christians' lives, where things kind of just go how they planned. So often I'm trying to think of, if I can think of anyone, because every single one of my friends and close relationships that I can think of where they are surrendered to God, there's these curveballs just all the time. And I think that is so often a mercy that allows us to really see these things like you're talking about, like the amount of healing that has to go on. So often, if that never gets revealed that it needs to happen, then it doesn't ever get healed.
Yeah. That makes me think of, I was reading through Exodus, just moving into Lent, and God says he could have brought them the way of Philistine, I think. Anyway, he could have brought them a shorter way, so they wouldn't have had to go 40 years in the desert. But he essentially says, but if they had gone that way, they would have encountered war. And if they had encountered war, they would have gone back into slavery into Egypt. And so what he did instead of this, literally, it's essentially something along the lines of like 40 days of traveling versus 40 years of traveling is like the difference of what it was. And God could have brought them in this like very short 40-way thing, but instead he brought them through this 40 years of just journeying with him, and like immense healing, of immense like reliance, immense surrender, and all these things where they had to like get rid of all these lies, all these negative things, all this lack of trust, and become perfectly reliant upon the Father. Like they had to become perfectly reliant upon God in the desert, right? Like there's nothing but reliance up by the end. But if he had taken them any other way, that wouldn't have happened. Right. And so I think it is such this thing of like, yeah, like he throws these curveballs and we could be like, why does the Lord allow this? Or why does he allow this suffering? Or why, like all of these things. But it's like in the moment, the Israelites hadn't, like they wouldn't be like, I am so glad that he has me in the desert for 40 years because I am on a growth journey. Like that's not what was going through their head at all. Like they were like, Jesus, Lord, what the heck? Jesus didn't exist yet, my bad. God, what the heck? Like they were mad and they were upset and they were processing through things. But it was essential because any other way they would have returned to slavery. Right. And I think like translating it back to this idea of self-image, like living in a place where we have to please, prove, provide, protect, right? Or earn our worth in any way. We have to prove our worth. We have to protect our worth. We have to provide our worth. We have to earn it. All of those different places. That's slavery. There's no freedom in that. It's not. And yet like we are raised in a place where we do, right? Whether it's our work. If I like once I prove that I am capable of doing this thing, then I am worthy. Once I earn the love of a man, then I'll be happy and I'll feel what I want to feel, right? But that's a place of, there's no freedom in that. That's slavery. And so oftentimes I think the Lord leads us on a different path than we originally wanted. Like I wanted to be married by now. I want to be pregnant right now. I would like, my path has me already married with a baby. But for some reason, he has me on this other one. And I know for a fact that if I had entered into marriage on my path, on my timeline that I had set for myself, I would be so insecure in that marriage, so lonely in that marriage. And I would be the bad, like, maybe whoever my husband was, like, it would be me that was leading to the insecurities and the struggle within that, because I was not ready. And I was in a place of slavery where I would have to earn love from him, and I would need more from him than he could give. Yeah. And so like he protected me from that slavery by bringing me on this longer one.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's so similar to what happened to me, because I graduated early and had all of just this very achievement-based plan laid out. And then I was going to get my MFA, and I applied to all of these prestigious programs. And this is, you know, I'm a person who had never been told no before on a like achievement-based front. And I get 9 rejection letters from every single school that I applied to the spring of this year. Not this year, but in when I was 22. And it was just like dead on the floor. And I just always had this image, though, in retrospect, of God like a parent being like, this hurts me more than it hurts you. Like, I'm not really doing this to like crush your spirit, but this would crush your spirit in a worse way if I allowed this to really happen. And looking back, I realized how much my life would have become about that. And even though I was already married, I would have really resented that marriage for being in the way, or, you know, needing to be open to life that could potentially derail things, and all of these other things that I would have carried into that situation where I was so focused on achieving the worth that I thought was going to lead me to finally feel a certain way about myself.
Yeah, absolutely. I was recently talking to a woman, and she was saying, she prayed this prayer like years ago, of essentially like, Lord, strip me of anything that distracts me from you. And he answered in like way more radical way than she wanted. And like, it was like like her whole world was destroyed pretty much. Right. But at its core, what it was is it removed all of her false identity, false confidence, the things that she had built her self-image upon that weren't him. Her marriage, her reputation in society, her ability to her reputation as a mother, like all of these things were destroyed. They were stripped from her. And like, that's a very extreme example, right? That's a very extreme example, but it is, I think we think we have this really solid idea of like building our foundation of our worth on all of these achievements and all of these little identity points. So my identity as a wife, my identity as a mother, my identity as a ambitious career, my identity as a career woman, as a student. Oh my gosh, a huge one. My identity as a student is like, I'm a good student. That's who I am. Like, right. All of these different things, like any I am statements, right, that aren't, I am a daughter of the king, right? Like anything outside of that, right, are all these like fragile identity points that our self-image is so steeped in. And when the Lord starts like pulling those strings, or maybe it's not even the Lord, maybe the devil, or maybe the world, something happens and those strings start to fall, and they're like these little, like, it's kind of like what's the game? Tetris? No, not Tetris. Jenga.
Yeah.
It's like a Jenga, like a super fragile Jenga tower. And like one little thing gets pulled and the whole tower crumbles. And like, that's what our self-image and our worth is, if it's not rooted in the fact that like, I am a daughter of the King of the universe. I have an unconditional worth that cannot be earned. It cannot be proved. It doesn't need, like, none of this needs to happen. I don't need to do anything. I am just, because I am created, I am worthy of infinite love. I'm worthy of being seen. I'm worthy of being wanted. I'm worthy of being known, simply because I've been created by the Father. That's it. And like, if our identity is built on anything else, it's a Jenga tower ready to fall.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of your wisdom with us, Lizzy. It was such a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you for having me. I absolutely love being here.
Thank you so much for joining me on today's episode of the Authentic Uprising podcast. If you're watching on YouTube or listening on a podcast app, make sure that you hit subscribe so that you can get all of our updates automatically in your app on YouTube. And we also ask that you leave us a review or a comment. If you're in a podcast app, leave us a review. That helps us get seen by more people. And on YouTube, leave us a comment. Let us know what you loved from the episode and send it on to a friend. I am sure that you know someone who really needs the message in this podcast from today. I also encourage you to check out Pink Salt Riot. That is my company that sponsors this podcast. We have an incredible online shop full of all kinds of beautiful and unique Christian lifestyle goods. You can shop our whole line at pinksaltriot.com. I'll see you next week.